Join Divine Oracle Podcast with your hosts, psychic medium Chris and Jillian. They interview a lot of people within the spiritual community and also discuss a lot of topics with indigenous and non-indigenous spiritual teachings.
Hey everyone, it is Psychic Meme Chris here right now. I have a legend for you, and this might scare you, especially right now at the Christmas holiday. This will be coming out to you right now.
The nights grow longer. The air turns sharp with frost. Winter is coming, and with it, the old celebrations return. Lights flicker in windows. Fires burn in hearths. Families gather close against the cold darkness outside. But in that darkness, something else stirs. Something older than Christmas. Something that remembers when winter meant survival, when the longest night held real terror, and when the boundary between our world and something other grew thin enough to cross. You're settling in now, finding your comfortable position. Maybe you've got a warm drink nearby. Perhaps you're watching the first snow fall outside your window. Either way, you're here for a story. Not a simple one, not a comfortable one, but one that needs telling.
If you haven't checked out our official website yet, please do that as well. We are hauntinglivepodcast.com. That's hauntinglivepodcast.com for our content on our website.
Now, let's talk about what came before Christmas. What lives alongside it? What waits in the corners of the celebration, grinning with too many teeth? You know Santa Claus, the jolly man in red, rosy cheeks, white beard, ho ho ho, the ultimate symbol of Christmas cheer. But Santa has a partner, a shadow, a counterpart who does the job Santa can't do. While Santa rewards the good children, something else handles the bad ones. And it's not a lump of coal. It's something far worse. His name is Krampus. Half goat, half demon, towering over grown men, covered in matted dark fur, horns curling from his skull like a crown of bone, a face that's almost human but wrong in every detail, stretched and bestial, with eyes that burn with ancient hunger, a tongue lolling long and red from jaws filled with fangs, cloven hooves that clatter on frozen cobblestones, chains that rattle and drag, binding him to traditions older than any church. And in those chains, rusty bells, birch branches for beating, and most terrifying of all, a basket, a wicker basket worn smooth by centuries of use, large enough to hold a child. Because Krampus doesn't just scare bad children. According to the folklore, he takes them, drags them away into the winter darkness. The children who are taken, they're never seen again. That's the tale that Austrian and German parents told their children for centuries. Be good, or Krampus will come. But here's what makes this fascinating. Krampus isn't a modern invention. He's not some Halloweenization of Christmas. Krampus is old. Older than Christianity. Older than the Roman Empire. He's a survival from the ancient pagan world, from the time when winter was genuinely terrifying. And he's still here, still celebrated, still feared in parts of Europe where the old traditions never quite died. Every year on December 5th, the night before St. Nicholas Day, young men in Austria, Germany, and Bavaria dress as Krampus. They don fursuits and carved wooden masks, strap on heavy bells, carry chains and birch switches, and they run through the streets in what's called a Krampuslauf, a Krampus run. They chase people. They scare children. They embody something primal and wild. The sound of the bells is deafening, overwhelming. People scatter. Children scream. And the adults, many of them are genuinely afraid, even though they know these are just their neighbors in costume. Because something about Krampus reaches deeper than rational knowledge. Something about him touches the part of our brain that still remembers what it was like to be prey, to be hunted in the darkness. This is not a story about Santa's silly helper. This is a story about genuine terror that existed for centuries. This is about why humans created demons to explain the cruelty of winter, about what Krampus really represents, about where he came from, and what he means. Tonight, we're exploring every aspect: his pagan origins, his evolution through Christianity, his near extinction and surprising revival, his meaning in folklore and psychology, and what all of this tells us about humanity's relationship with fear, punishment, and the darkness inside us all. So, get comfortable, let the winter close around you, and let me tell you about the demon who comes when the snow falls. The pagan origins. To understand Krampus, we need to go back, way back, before Christianity, before written history in the Alpine regions, back to tribal peoples living in one of the harshest environments in Europe. The Alps in winter are brutal. Temperatures plunge far below zero. Snow buries entire valleys. Avalanches destroy without warning. The darkness lasts longer than anywhere else because the mountains block the already short winter sun. In this environment, ancient peoples developed beliefs to survive, to explain, to give meaning to the suffering that winter brought every year. One of these beliefs centered on the wild hunt. The wild hunt appears across Germanic, Norse, and Celtic mythology. During the darkest part of winter, supernatural beings hunt across the sky and through the forests, violent, chaotic, dangerous, led by various gods or the souls of the dead who died violently and can't rest. And if you're caught outside when the wild hunt passes, you're taken, dragged along with the hunt, lost forever to the winter darkness. This wasn't entertainment. This was a genuine belief system, a way to explain why people disappeared in winter, why someone sent out in a blizzard never came back, why children who wandered away would vanish without trace. The wild hunt was real to these people, as real as the snow, as real as the cold that could kill you in hours. Over time, the wild hunt evolved. Different regions personalized it, created specific beings that embodied the terror of winter. In the Alpine regions, one of these beings became known by various names: Krampus, ๊kʁampʊs, Bartelschmutzli, dozens of regional variations. But the core remained consistent, a horned, furry, demonic figure who appeared during the darkest time of year, associated with punishment, with wildness, with the dangerous forces of nature. Here's what's crucial. To modern people, demons are Christian concepts. But the people who created Krampus weren't Christian. They were pagans. Their demons weren't about sin and salvation. They were about nature, about the harsh reality of existence where winter could kill you. Krampus was a nature spirit, a wild man, a forest being. He represented the untamed, uncivilized, dangerous aspects of the world. The reminder that humans didn't control everything. That outside the safety of the village, there were forces that would harm you without malice, simply because that was their nature. Think about what winter meant in the pre-modern Alps. No central heating, no supermarkets, no rescue services. When snow closed the passes, you were isolated for months. The food you'd stored was all you had. If your shelter failed, you froze. If you got lost, you died. Children were especially vulnerable. They didn't understand the dangers. They'd wander off. They'd go out in weather that could kill them. So the stories about Krampus served a brutal, practical purpose. They scared children into obedience. They created a supernatural enforcer for rules that were literally life and death. Stay close to home. Don't wander into the forest. Come inside when you're told. Obey your parents, because if you don't, Krampus will get you. This wasn't cruelty. This was survival. These stories existed in cultures where childhood mortality was horrifically high, where a single mistake could mean death, where parents desperately needed their children to understand danger. Krampus was a teaching tool, a warning system, a way to program fear of genuine dangers into children's minds before those dangers could kill them. Now let's talk about what Krampus looked like in these early traditions. Half goat, half demon. The goat aspect is crucial. Goats in European paganism were associated with fertility, but also with the wild, with nature deities like Pan, who existed outside human social structures. Krampus has horns, large curving horns like an alpine ibex. Horns represented divine power, connection to animal spirits, but also marked something as other, as not human, as potentially dangerous. He's covered in dark matted fur. This marks him as wild, as an animal, as something that doesn't follow human civilization. His face is the most disturbing part. Almost human but wrong, the mouth too large, the teeth too sharp, the tongue too long, often lolling out obscenely, the eyes burning like coals or empty black voids. It's the uncanny valley effect. Close enough to human to be recognizable, different enough to trigger deep discomfort. Cloven hooves instead of feet, more goat imagery. The sound of hooves was significant. You'd hear him coming, clattering on stone, on frozen ground. He carries chains. They make noise, announcing his presence. They can be weapons. And symbolically, chains represent restraint, but chains that could break free at any moment. He carries birch branches. Birch switches were traditional tools for corporal punishment. But birch was also a sacred tree, associated with renewal and purification. The beating wasn't just punishment. It was a cleansing. And the basket, large enough to stuff children into. What happens to children in the basket depends on the version. Some say he drowns them. Some say he eats them. Some say he drags them to his lair in the mountains. Some say they simply vanish, leaving their fate to imagination, which might be the most terrifying version. This is the original Krampus, a genuine figure of terror that existed in the beliefs of people who lived close to death, who knew winter could kill, who needed their children afraid of the right things. This figure existed for centuries in Alpine pagan religions, celebrated in winter festivals, part of the spiritual landscape, until Christianity arrived. And when Christianity came to the Alps, it didn't know what to do with Krampus. It couldn't destroy him. He was too deeply embedded. So instead, Christianity did what it often did with pagan figures. It demonized him. Literally, made him serve Christian purposes, connected him to a saint. And that's where our story takes its most fascinating turn, because Krampus was about to meet Saint Nicholas. And together, they would create one of the strangest partnerships in folklore history. The holy man and the demon working together to judge children. The partnership, saint and shadow. Christianity came to the Alpine regions slowly, over centuries. Unlike places where conversion happened rapidly through conquest, the mountain villages converted gradually, keeping their old beliefs alongside the new ones, blending pagan and Christian in ways that horrified church authorities, but were perfectly natural to the locals. And nowhere is this blending more visible than in the partnership between St. Nicholas and Krampus. St. Nicholas of Myra was a real person, a 4th century bishop in what is now Turkey, known for his generosity, particularly to children. The most famous legend tells of him secretly giving gold to a poor man with 3 daughters, saving them from being sold into prostitution. He became the patron saint of children. His feast day, December 6th, was celebrated throughout Christian Europe. As Christianity spread into the Germanic and Alpine regions, St. Nicholas came with it. But the people already had winter traditions, already had Krampus. The church faced a problem. They couldn't get rid of Krampus. He was too deeply embedded. So they adapted him, co-opted him, made him serve Christian purposes. They created a partnership. St. Nicholas would reward good children, would bring gifts, sweets, small presents, would represent Christian virtue, kindness, generosity. He was the carrot. And Krampus, he would punish the bad children, would represent sin, wickedness, consequences. He was the stick. Together, they formed a complete moral system, one that the church could use to reinforce Christian values while acknowledging darker beliefs the locals refused to abandon. But here's what's fascinating. The church didn't fully control this partnership. The people did, and they maintained aspects of Krampus that the church never officially approved of, but couldn't suppress. In traditional Krampus and St. Nicholas celebrations, St. Nicholas appears first. Dressed in bishop's robes, carrying his staff, often riding a white horse. He's dignified, holy, calm. Children approach him, recite prayers or verses, receive treats. But then comes Krampus, and everything changes. Krampus doesn't arrive calmly. He bursts onto the scene with chaos, chains rattling, bells clanging, creatures covered in fur and horns charging through the crowd. The energy shifts instantly from reverent to wild, from controlled to barely contained. St. Nicholas might ask children if they've been good. Krampus doesn't ask. He acts as if he knows. He singles out children, chases them, threatens them with his birch branches, rattles his chains, shows them his basket. The symbolism is clear. Christian virtue rewards. Christian sin punishes. Good behavior brings treats. Bad behavior brings terror. But here's what the church never quite managed to suppress. Krampus isn't just scary, he's also fun. The Krampus celebrations have an element of carnival, of licensed chaos, of permitted misbehavior. For one night, normal social rules relax. Young men dressed as Krampus can run through streets acting wild. They can be aggressive in ways that would normally be unacceptable. They can create disorder. This is the pagan aspect of Krampus that Christianity never fully tamed. He represents not just punishment for sin, but something older, the need for periodic release from social constraints, the acknowledgement that civilization requires safety valves, that humans need outlets for their wilder impulses. The church tolerated this because the alternative was worse. Better to have Krampus appear alongside St. Nicholas than to fight a losing battle against traditions that refuse to die. But the church did try to modify Krampus, to make him more explicitly Christian. And this is where Krampus transforms from a nature spirit into something darker. In Christian theology, there are demons, fallen angels, servants of Satan, inhabitants of hell. These aren't nature spirits. They're explicitly evil, working to corrupt souls. So the church reframed Krampus. He wasn't a pagan forest spirit. He was a demon. His horns weren't the horns of a goat god. They were the horns of Satan. His chains weren't just tools. They were the chains of hell. His basket didn't take children to the mountains. It took them to eternal damnation. This reframing made Krampus more terrifying. Eternal damnation is heavier than being lost in the forest. But it also made him more manageable for the church. A demon could be controlled by Christian authority. St. Nicholas, in this dynamic, wasn't just a generous bishop. He was a holy man with power over demons. Krampus appeared with him not as an equal partner, but as a servant, a bound demon forced to serve Christian purposes. The chains weren't just decorative, they symbolized his subjugation to Christian authority. In some traditions, St. Nicholas literally controls Krampus, holds his chains, orders him around, uses him as a tool. The message is clear. Christianity has power over the forces of evil. But despite centuries of Christian framing, Krampus never quite becomes just a cautionary example of defeated evil. He remains popular, beloved even. People continue to celebrate him with genuine affection. Why? What is it about a child-threatening demon that makes him so enduring? Part of it is simple psychology. We're drawn to the forbidden, the dangerous, the dark. Krampus represents everything society tells us to suppress. Wildness, aggression, chaos. And there's something thrilling about acknowledging those aspects, even in controlled, ritualized ways. Part of it is cultural resistance. For Alpine peoples, Krampus was theirs. A local tradition, a connection to their pre-Christian ancestors. Celebrating Krampus was maintaining cultural identity in the face of outside religious authority. And part of it is that Krampus serves a genuine psychological need. Children need to learn about consequences. The purely positive figure of St. Nicholas, giving rewards without corresponding punishment, is incomplete. Krampus balances the equation. He's the shadow that makes the light meaningful. But the Church never fully embraced this. Over centuries, there would be repeated attempts to suppress Krampus entirely. The Night of the Demon, December 5th, Krampusnacht, Krampus Night, the evening before St. Nicholas Day. In traditional Alpine villages, this was one of the most important nights of the year, and for children, it was the most terrifying. The day would start normally, but tension built underneath. Everyone knew what was coming. Parents would remind children to be on their best behavior. Grandparents would tell stories about Krampus. Older siblings would tease younger ones, claiming to hear chains already. As evening approached, preparations began. Families would gather inside, doors locked, windows shuttered, fires built bright, partly for warmth, but partly because light was protection. Krampus belonged to darkness. Inside by the fire, you were relatively safe. Around twilight, the young men who would portray Krampus began their preparations. Being chosen was an honor, but also a responsibility. You had to be strong. The costumes were heavy. You had to be brave. You'd be portraying something people genuinely feared. And you had to be trusted. You'd be given permission to scare people but couldn't cross certain lines. The costumes were incredible. Handcrafted, often passed down through generations. Full bodysuits of dark fur, goat, sheep, or cow, matted and smelling of animal and smoke. Carved wooden masks with articulated jaws, real teeth, glass eyes that caught the light, horns attached. Real ibex horns were prized. They had to be large, impressive, threatening. Bells were crucial. Heavy cowbells, dozens of them, attached to belts or harnesses. These could weigh 30, 40, 50 pounds. The sound they made was harsh, discordant, overwhelming. It announced Krampus's presence but also drowned out thought, created auditory chaos. Chains wrapped around the body, trailing on the ground. Heavy iron meant to bind livestock. They rattled and dragged and sparked on stone. The sound was distinctive, unavoidable, terrifying in the dark. Each Krampus carried birch branches, switches that would actually be used. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to sting. That was the point. And the basket, the butte large wicker, worn on the back, big enough for a child. Sometimes empty, sometimes containing wrapped bundles, suggesting previous victims. The most visceral threat. Once costumed, the Krampus figures would gather at the village edge, often a dozen or more. They'd drink, partly for courage, partly to loosen inhibitions, partly because the role required controlled wildness, easier to access with alcohol. And then, as full darkness fell, they would begin. The Krampuslauf, the Krampus run. It started with sound. The bells, heard first from distance, echoing off mountains, growing louder. Villagers would hear and know they're coming. Children would press close to parents. Some would start crying before Krampus even appeared. Then the Krampuses would emerge from darkness, not walking, running, charging through streets with aggressive, animalistic energy, bells clanging rhythmically, chains dragging and sparking, guttural roars emerging from masks. They would go house to house, bang on doors, rattle chains against shutters. The family inside would wait, hearts pounding. Eventually, the door would open, or the Krampuses would burst in. The bells would be deafening in the confined space. The chains would rattle. The Krampuses would circle this predatory movement. They would focus on the children. St. Nicholas would usually arrive shortly after. He was the calm in the storm. He would ask questions. Have you been good? Have you obeyed your parents? Said your prayers? Done your chores? The children would answer, trembling. Yes, we've been good. We promise. St. Nicholas would question the parents. Is this true? And here's where it got psychologically complex. The parents would tell the truth. This child talks back sometimes. That one doesn't finish vegetables. This one was lazy. That one told a lie. Each confession would make the Krampuses more agitated. They would move closer to the accused child. Rattle chains, show switches. St. Nicholas would deliberate, pronounce judgment, and if the offences were serious enough, he would nod to Krampus. The child wasn't actually taken. This was ritual, controlled theatre. But the child experienced genuine fear, felt the rough hands grab them, smelled the animal fur and sweat, heard the chains and bells overwhelming their senses. The experience was intense but brief, designed to create memorable fear without lasting harm. Though modern psychology recognizes this approach raises valid concerns about childhood trauma. Finally, St. Nicholas would intervene, would make the child promise to be better, and Krampus would release them, usually after a few stinging swats with the birch switches. This would repeat, house after house. Between houses, the Krampuses would run through streets. Anyone caught outside would be chased. The celebrations often lasted hours, into deep night. Finally, as midnight approached, the Krampuses would retreat. Back to the village edge, back to the forest. The bells would fade, the chains would stop, the village would calm. Children would eventually stop crying, be comforted, fall into exhausted sleep. And in the morning, St. Nicholas would return, alone this time, peaceful, bringing small gifts to children who'd survived Krampus Night. The message was complete. Fear and reward, punishment and kindness, the demon and the saint, shadow and light. This is what Krampusnacht was. Not a cute parade, but a genuine ritual of communal terror, carefully orchestrated, serving both practical purposes, teaching obedience, and deeper psychological needs, acknowledging darkness, providing outlets for repressed wildness. It was brilliant. It was disturbing. It was effective. And it was this tradition that authorities would repeatedly try to destroy. The suppression and revival. The first serious suppression came during the Counter-Reformation, 16th and 17th centuries. The Catholic Church, responding to Protestant Reformation, tried to standardize religious practice, eliminate local variations, stamp out anything pagan. Krampus definitely smelled of paganism. Church authorities issued decrees. Krampus celebrations were forbidden. The figure was identified as demonic, inappropriate for Christian celebration. Priests preached against it. Officials were ordered to prevent Krampus runs. In cities where church authority was stronger, this sometimes worked. But in rural alpine villages, the decrees were ignored. The thing about mountain villages is isolation, hard to reach, especially in winter. The people had their own sense of what was right. They'd celebrated Krampusnacht for as long as anyone remembered. Some priest from the city telling them to stop, not compelling. So they continued, maybe more quietly, maybe without official sanction. But they continued. The church tried different approaches. If they couldn't eliminate Krampus, maybe they could sanitize him, make him less frightening, more clearly subordinate to St. Nicholas, remove the most pagan elements. This partly worked. In some areas, Krampus became more comedic, less genuinely terrifying, but the core persisted. The next major suppression came during the Enlightenment, 18th century. This time, objections weren't religious, they were rational. Educated people found Krampus barbaric, medieval, superstitious, harmful to children. They argued that terrifying children was abuse, that celebrating demons was ignorant superstition, that modern rational society should abandon such primitive practices. Some areas listened. The tradition weakened in urban areas. Parents who moved to cities often didn't continue the practice. But in the mountains, in traditional villages, Krampus persisted. The biggest suppression came in the 20th century under fascism. The Nazis had a strange relationship with Krampus. Initially, they valued authentic Germanic traditions, and Krampus was undeniably Germanic and pre-Christian. But Krampus was chaotic, uncontrolled. He represented wildness that fascism, with its emphasis on order and state control, couldn't tolerate. Plus, Krampus was connected with Catholic St. Nicholas, and the Nazis wanted to de-emphasize Christian elements. They tried to co-opt him, transform him, separate him from St. Nicholas, use him for propaganda. But Krampus resisted co-option. He was too bound to tradition, too connected to specific cultural practice. So eventually, fascist authorities banned him. In 1934, the Dollfuss regime in Austria officially prohibited Krampus celebrations. Costumes were confiscated, masks destroyed. Participation could mean arrest. This was the most serious suppression Krampus had faced. And for a few years, it worked. Public celebrations stopped. But two things saved him. First, World War II created chaos that made enforcement impossible. During the war, with resources stretched thin, people did what they wanted, including quietly resuming Krampus traditions. Second, the tradition had gone underground so successfully it couldn't be fully killed. Families continued modified versions in private. Costumes that were confiscated or destroyed were rebuilt. Knowledge of the celebrations was passed down in secret. When the war ended, when Austria was rebuilding, when fascist laws were abolished, Krampus emerged from hiding. Not immediately, but gradually. Through the late 1940s and 1950s, the traditions resumed. First tentatively, then more openly, then enthusiastically. By the 1960s, Krampus was back. Public Krampus runs were happening again. Costumes were being made with renewed skill. New generations were learning the traditions. But something had changed. The suppression had created a sense of Krampus as endangered, as something that needed active preservation. And that shifted how people thought about the tradition. Before, Krampus was just what you did, part of the calendar. You didn't think about why. You just did it because that's what your family, your village had always done. After the suppression and revival, Krampus became conscious tradition, something deliberately chosen, celebrated not just because it was habitual, but because it was meaningful, because it represented cultural identity and resistance to outside control. This consciousness made Krampus stronger in some ways, more deliberately maintained, more actively taught. Organizations formed to preserve the traditions. Krampus groups created formal structures, but it also changed the tradition, made it more performative, more about cultural preservation, and less about genuine folk belief. The line between ritual and reenactment became clearer. By late 20th century, Krampus was thriving in Austria and southern Germany. Celebrations were bigger than ever. Towns competed to have the most impressive Krampuslauf. Tourism boards promoted events. The figure authorities tried to eliminate was now a source of regional pride. And then something unexpected happened. Krampus went global. In the 1980s and 90s, German and Austrian immigrants to the United States began organizing Krampus events in their communities. Not as authentic celebrations, they couldn't replicate village traditions in American suburbs, but as cultural festivals. American popular culture noticed. In the 2000s and 2010s, Krampus started appearing everywhere. Movies, TV shows, comic books, horror fiction. He became a horror icon, a dark Christmas figure that appealed to people tired of relentless holiday cheer. Los Angeles, Portland, Philadelphia, New York, cities across America started hosting Krampusnacht events, often organized by people with no Germanic heritage, just drawn to the aesthetic, the concept, the permission to celebrate darkness during the holidays. Krampus merchandise exploded. T-shirts, ornaments, cards, decorations. He became weirdly mainstream while maintaining his dark edge. And this modern, commercialized, globalized Krampus fed back into traditional Alpine celebrations. The attention brought tourists, made events bigger, more elaborate, created pressure to make them more spectacular, more photogenic, more shareable on social media. Some traditionalists worried Krampus was being diluted. That authentic folk tradition was becoming entertainment. That genuine fear was being replaced by performative spookiness for cameras. They had a point. Modern Krampuslauf events now feature thousands of spectators, many from other countries, filming everything. The spontaneity and wildness have been constrained by safety regulations, liability concerns, tourist expectations. But Krampus has never been more popular, never been more widely celebrated, never had more people invested in keeping traditions alive. And maybe that's the ultimate victory. Not that Krampus stayed the same, he never did, he was always evolving, but that he survived at all. Despite repeated attempts by church and state to eliminate him, despite modernization and urbanization, despite every force that kills traditional folklore, Krampus persists. He survived because we need him, because the completely sanitized, commercialized, relentlessly cheerful version of Christmas that modern consumer culture tries to sell us is incomplete, missing something. And Krampus fills that gap. But what exactly does he fill? What is the psychological purpose? What does Krampus mean? To answer that, we need to step back from history and look at Krampus analytically. Understand not just what he is, but what he represents. The meaning. Why we need our demons. Why do humans create figures like Krampus? Why tell children about creatures that will harm them? And why, despite centuries of suppression, do these dark figures persist? The simple answer is behavior control. Krampus scares children into obedience. Effective, done. But that's incomplete. Because if it was just about behavior control, there are easier ways. You don't need costumes and community-wide celebrations and centuries of tradition just to threaten punishment. Krampus persists because he serves multiple functions, psychological, social, cultural functions beyond simple obedience. Let's start with fear-based learning. Children learn through consequences. Touch hot stove, get burned, don't touch again. This works for immediate dangers. But what about dangers that aren't immediate? Behaviors where consequences come later or from external sources. That's where stories come in. Stories let us experience consequences vicariously. Learn about danger without exposure to actual danger. And scary stories encode those lessons more powerfully than calm explanations. Krampus is a scary story made tangible, made real enough that the fear response engages fully. When a child experiences Krampusnacht, their brain encodes it as real danger. The lesson, behave or face consequences, becomes visceral, emotional, memorable. This is harsh. Modern parenting theory generally rejects fear-based discipline. We understand excessive fear can be traumatic, can damage relationships, can create anxiety. But context matters. In pre-modern alpine communities, childhood misbehavior stakes were often life or death. A child who wandered off could freeze. A child who didn't follow safety rules could fall from cliffs or drown. A child who didn't obey during emergencies could get themselves or others killed. In that context, creating strong fear-based learning wasn't cruel. It was survival. Better a frightened child who stays close than a dead child who didn't learn in time. We can debate whether such methods are appropriate in modern contexts, where childhood is generally safer, but we can understand why they developed. But there's more than behavior control. Krampus also serves social function, boundary maintenance. Every society has rules, spoken and unspoken, behaviors that are acceptable and aren't, ways children must learn to act to become functioning community members. These rules need enforcement, need teaching, need internalization by each generation. Krampus is an enforcement mechanism, but not just individual, communal. The entire village participates in Krampusnacht. Everyone plays their role. Everyone reinforces the same messages. This creates consistency. Children don't hear different rules from different adults. They hear one unified message. These are the rules. Everyone agrees, and breaking them has consequences the entire community will enforce. This also removes burden from parents. Parents don't have to be sole enforcers, constantly saying no, being both loving caregivers and strict disciplinarians. Krampus does the disciplining. The parent can comfort afterward, be the safe haven, while the community's monster does the enforcement. This is psychologically useful, allows parents to maintain primarily positive relationships while ensuring behavioral compliance. The good cop/bad cop dynamic, with Krampus as ultimate bad cop everyone can agree on. But there's an even deeper function: psychological integration of darkness. Carl Jung talked about the shadow self, parts of our personality we suppress, deny, reject. Anger, aggression, selfishness, cruelty. These aspects don't disappear because we pretend they don't exist. They stay. And if never acknowledged, never given outlet, they can erupt dangerously. Krampus is a cultural shadow figure. He represents everything civilized society tells us to suppress: wildness, aggression, chaos, cruelty, animal nature. But by giving these qualities a form, a figure, a ritualized expression, the culture creates a safe way to acknowledge darkness, to say, yes, these things exist. Yes, they're part of reality. Yes, we need to respect their power. And by making Krampus part of celebration, by incorporating him into the holiday cycle, by allowing young men to literally embody him for one night, the culture provides an outlet, a pressure valve, a time when it's acceptable to be wild, to be aggressive, to break normal social rules. This is the carnival function, the licensed transgression. Every stable society needs these moments, times when normal rules are suspended, when repressed energies can be safely expressed, when the civilized mask can slip for a controlled period before being put firmly back in place. Without these outlets, without ways to acknowledge and express the darker aspects of human nature, societies become brittle. Repression builds pressure. Eventually, something breaks. Krampus provides the outlet. He's the demon we're allowed to celebrate, the darkness we're permitted to acknowledge, the fear we can feel without being consumed by it. Now let's look at Krampus from an anthropological perspective. Because similar figures appear in cultures worldwide, not identical, but filling similar roles. The punishment figure who balances the reward figure, the dark entity who enforces social norms, the monster who teaches children boundaries. In the Netherlands and Belgium, there's Zwarte Piet, Black Pete, St. Nicholas's helper, who originally punished bad children, though this figure has become extremely controversial due to racist imagery, leading to major cultural debates and changes. In France, there's Père Fouettard, Father Whipper, who accompanies Saint Nicholas and threatens to beat misbehaving children. In Iceland, there are the Yule lads and their mother, the ogress Grýla, who according to folklore kidnaps and eats naughty children. In Germanic traditions, there are various gift-bringing figures with dark companions: Knecht Ruprecht, Belsnickel, Hans Trapp. Even in cultures without European roots, we find similar patterns. The Japanese have Namahage, demon-like figures who visit homes during New Year, scare children, and demand they promise to be good. The figure serves an almost identical function to Krampus, despite developing completely independently. What this tells us is that Krampus isn't just a quirky European tradition. He's an expression of something universal in human culture: the need for a punishment figure, the need to give children's fears a form, the need to externalize enforcement of social norms, the need to acknowledge darkness as part of the cultural landscape. Different cultures create different versions based on their specific contexts, mythologies, and values, but the underlying pattern appears again and again. The gift giver and the punisher, the light and the shadow, the reward and the consequence. This universality suggests that figures like Krampus serve a genuine human need, that they emerged independently in multiple cultures because they solve a problem every culture faces: how to socialize children, how to maintain social order, how to acknowledge darkness while celebrating light. Now, the modern critique. Because there are serious, legitimate concerns about Krampus traditions when viewed through a contemporary lens. The most obvious concern is trauma. Deliberately creating intense fear in children, even in a controlled ritual context, can cause genuine psychological harm. Some children experience Krampusnacht as traumatic, have nightmares, develop anxiety, carry fear long after the event. Is this acceptable? Is cultural tradition justification for potentially harming children? There's no easy answer. Defenders argue that the experience is controlled, temporary, and outweighed by lessons learned. That children in traditional communities understand the context, know they're ultimately safe, and integrate the experience as part of cultural identity rather than pure trauma. Critics argue that any deliberate infliction of fear on children raises ethical concerns, regardless of cultural context. That the same lessons could be taught through gentler means. That tradition isn't justification for harm. Both positions have merit, and increasingly, even in traditional Alpine communities, there's debate about how intense Krampus should be, whether there should be age limits, whether children should be able to opt out, whether celebrations need modification for modern sensibilities about child welfare. Some communities have created friendly Krampus events for young children, where Krampus is clearly theatrical, not genuinely threatening, where children can take pictures with him, where it's obviously pretend. Traditionalists hate this, argue that a friendly Krampus defeats the entire purpose, that diluting the fear eliminates effectiveness, that if Krampus isn't scary, he's just a costume. But parents increasingly demand it, want children to experience cultural tradition without trauma, want Krampus to be fun rather than frightening. This tension between tradition and modern values is ongoing, and it's not unique to Krampus. It appears in many folk traditions that involve elements now considered problematic. How do we preserve cultural traditions while respecting modern understanding of human rights, child welfare, and psychological harm? There's no simple answer. Each community, each family has to navigate these questions themselves. Another modern concern is gender dynamics. Traditional Krampus celebrations have historically permitted young men to be physically aggressive with young women in ways we'd now recognize as sexual harassment. Chasing them, grabbing them, beating them with switches, all justified as tradition and fun. This is problematic. Many modern Krampus events have implemented rules against this, made clear that while scaring people is acceptable, unwanted physical contact isn't. That tradition doesn't excuse behavior that makes people feel unsafe, but enforcement is difficult. The entire point of Krampusnacht is licensed transgression. When you tell young men they can be wild, aggressive, break normal rules, but then try to impose new rules about exactly how far they can go, the boundaries get blurry, especially when alcohol is involved, when masks provide anonymity, when crowd mentality takes over. Some critics argue the entire tradition is irredeemably patriarchal, that it exists to enforce male authority, to police women's behavior, to give men license to be aggressive, that it should be abandoned entirely. Others argue Krampus can be reformed, that problematic elements can be removed while preserving the core tradition, that women can participate as Krampus figures, which is increasingly happening, that the celebration can be more egalitarian while maintaining its essential character. There's also the question of cultural appropriation. As Krampus has become popular globally, especially in the United States, people with no Germanic heritage have adopted the figure, created celebrations, sold merchandise, made movies. Some people from traditional Krampus regions are delighted, happy to see their folklore spread globally, pleased that Krampus is being appreciated by wider audiences. Others are uncomfortable, feel that Krampus is being commodified, divorced from his cultural context, turned into just another Halloween-style monster. That deep meaning is being lost in favor of superficial aesthetic. And there's particular irony in American consumer culture, which created the modern, sanitized, commercialized Santa Claus, now appropriating Krampus and potentially doing the same thing to him. But cultural exchange is inevitable. Folklore has always traveled, been adapted, been reimagined. The Krampus that Alpine villagers celebrate today is itself an evolution, incorporating Christian elements the original pagans never intended. Culture is always in flux. Maybe the question isn't whether Krampus should spread globally, but how. Whether people adopting the figure understand what he represents, whether they're engaging with deeper meaning or just treating him as an aesthetic. Let's zoom out. What does the Krampus phenomenon tell us about modern society, about what we're missing, about what we're searching for? Because Krampus's modern revival, especially in non-traditional contexts, is interesting. People are actively seeking out darkness, choosing to celebrate a demon, rejecting the relentless positivity of mainstream Christmas in favor of something scarier, weirder, more honest about difficulty and fear. Why? I think it's because modern consumer Christmas has become unbearable for many people. The forced cheer, the financial pressure, the family conflicts, the pretense that everything is magical and perfect when reality is messy and hard. Krampus offers an alternative, a way to acknowledge that December is dark, literally and metaphorically, that winter is hard, that family gatherings are stressful, that not everything is merry and bright, that sometimes you want to scream at the relentless Christmas music and fake snow and pressure to be grateful and happy and perfect. Krampus says, it's okay to feel the darkness. It's okay to acknowledge the fear and difficulty. It's okay to celebrate the weird and scary alongside the warm and comforting. For people who feel alienated from mainstream Christmas culture, who find the sanitized celebration hollow, who want something with more edge and authenticity, Krampus provides an alternative. This is particularly appealing to certain subcultures. Goths, horror fans, people who've always felt like outsiders at Christmas, people with complicated family relationships who find the perfect family gathering narrative painful, people who've experienced loss and for whom relentless holiday cheer feels like an insult. Krampus offers these people a way in, a way to participate in seasonal celebration without betraying their authentic feelings. A permission slip to be dark during the most wonderful time of the year. And paradoxically, by acknowledging the darkness, by giving it form and celebration, many people find that the light becomes meaningful again, that you can appreciate the genuine warmth of the season more fully when you're not pretending the cold and dark don't exist. This is the wisdom that traditional Krampus celebrations always embodied, that St. Nicholas and Krampus need each other. That reward without punishment is meaningless. That light without shadow is blinding. That the full experience of winter requires acknowledging both celebration and harshness. Modern consumer culture tried to give us Christmas without Krampus. All light, no shadow. All presents, no consequences. All cheer, no acknowledgement of difficulty. And it rang hollow, felt fake, left people searching for something more authentic. So Krampus returned, not because tradition demanded it, but because we needed him. Because humans need to acknowledge darkness, need to face fear, need to have cultural permission to not be okay, even during the holidays. Especially during the holidays. Krampus is the antidote to toxic positivity. The cultural figure who says, it's okay to be scared, to be angry, to acknowledge that things are hard. You don't have to pretend everything is perfect. The demons are real. And paradoxically, by facing them, by naming them, by giving them form, we gain power over them. This is why Krampus has survived centuries of suppression, why he keeps returning, why he's more popular now than he's been in decades. Because we need our demons, need our shadows, need our dark figures who balance the light. We need Krampus, not because we're cruel or sick or damaged, but because we're human. And humans are complicated. We contain both light and darkness, both kindness and cruelty, both civilization and wildness. Any culture that only acknowledges one side is incomplete, is lying about human nature. Krampus tells the truth. He's the darkness we carry, the fear we feel, the wildness we suppress, the consequences we face, the winter that kills, the suffering that's real. And by acknowledging him, by celebrating him, by giving him one night a year to be real and present and frightening, we integrate that darkness. Make it part of our cultural landscape. Rob it of some power by naming it and facing it directly. This is deep folklore wisdom. Ancient psychological insight wrapped in costume and ceremony and tradition. Krampus isn't just a scary Christmas figure. He's a solution to a fundamental human problem. How to acknowledge darkness without being consumed by it. How to teach children about consequences without destroying their innocence. How to maintain civilization while respecting the wildness civilization is built on. How to celebrate light while honoring shadow. He's the demon we need, the shadow that makes light meaningful, the punishment that makes reward valuable, the fear that makes safety precious. Conclusion: the demon who came back. We've traveled deep into winter tonight, into the history and meaning of one of folklore's most enduring dark figures. From pagan Alps to Christian Europe to modern global culture. From genuine village terror to commercialized celebration. From the wild hunt to widespread revival. And through it all, one truth emerges. Krampus persists because we need him. Not the surface version. Not the friendly costume character or the horror movie monster. But what he represents. The acknowledgement of darkness. The permission to face fear. The balance to relentless positivity. The shadow that gives light its meaning. In our modern world, we've tried to eliminate darkness from the holiday season. Christmas has become sanitized, commercialized, reduced to consumption and forced cheer. We're told to be grateful, to be happy, to create perfect family moments. The pressure is immense. The fakeness is exhausting. And into this landscape of mandated joy, Krampus returns, offering something different, something more honest. A way to acknowledge that December is dark, that winter is hard, that holidays are complicated, that not everyone feels merry and bright. This is Krampus's gift to modern culture. Not fear for its own sake, but honest acknowledgement. Permission to feel what we actually feel. Liberation from the tyranny of relentless positivity. When you celebrate Krampus, whether in a traditional Alpine village or at a modern American Krampusnacht event, or simply by acknowledging his existence, you're doing something important. You're saying, I see the darkness. I acknowledge the difficulty. I refuse to pretend everything is perfect. And paradoxically, this acknowledgement makes the genuine light more precious. When you've faced Krampus, when you've looked at the shadow, Santa's gifts mean more. The warmth of family means more. The light in the darkness means more. This is ancient wisdom, the same wisdom that created Krampus centuries ago, that humans need balance, need both reward and consequence, need both light and shadow, need to acknowledge the full spectrum of experience rather than pretending half of reality doesn't exist. For parents wondering whether to introduce children to Krampus, the question isn't whether he's too scary. The question is what you want to teach. If you want to teach that consequences are real, that actions matter, that the world contains both kindness and danger, then Krampus has value, presented in age-appropriate ways that create healthy respect rather than trauma. For communities celebrating traditional Krampuslauf events, the challenge is preserving authenticity while respecting modern values. Can Krampus be genuinely compelling without crossing ethical lines? Can young men embody wildness in controlled ways without harassing people? Can tradition evolve to exclude problematic elements while maintaining essential character? These are difficult questions with no perfect answers, but the fact that communities are wrestling with them, trying to find balance, working to preserve tradition while respecting human dignity, is itself valuable. Culture is always in negotiation, always evolving, always trying to maintain core values while adapting to new contexts. For people discovering Krampus from outside traditional communities, the invitation is to engage deeply, to learn the history and meaning, to understand what Krampus represents beyond the aesthetic, to respect cultural roots while recognizing that folklore evolves, that new cultures can meaningfully engage with old traditions if done thoughtfully. Krampus isn't just a cool monster, he's a complex figure carrying centuries of meaning. You don't have to be Alpine to appreciate him, but you should understand what you're celebrating, should recognize that behind the costume is real folklore, real tradition, real psychological and cultural function. And for everyone navigating modern life, Krampus offers a lesson, a reminder that darkness is real and valuable, that pretending everything is fine doesn't make it fine, that facing fear is often healthier than denying it, that acknowledging shadow makes light meaningful, that the full human experience includes both joy and terror, both warmth and cold, both celebration and consequence. This winter, as the nights grow long and darkness deepens, as you're bombarded with holiday cheer and pressure to be grateful and happy, remember Krampus. Remember that it's okay to acknowledge the darkness, to feel the fear, to face the shadow. You don't have to be relentlessly positive. You don't have to pretend everything is perfect. You don't have to fake enthusiasm for a season that might be difficult for you. The darkness is real, the winter is hard, the demons exist. And that's okay, because acknowledging them, naming them, facing them gives you power, makes the genuine warmth more precious, makes the real light more meaningful, makes survival through winter something to actually celebrate rather than fake. Krampus teaches us that we're stronger than we think, that we can face fear and survive, that looking at shadow doesn't destroy us, that integrating darkness makes us whole rather than broken. This is his gift, not terror for its own sake, but the strength that comes from honest acknowledgement, the wisdom that comes from facing truth, the integration that comes from accepting the full spectrum of human experience. So this December, if you hear chains rattling, if you see horns in the snow, if you feel that old atavistic fear creeping up your spine, remember, this is ancient, this is necessary, this is human, this is Krampus, still teaching lessons we need to learn, still offering truth in a world drowning in comfortable lies, still providing balance in a culture that tries to eliminate shadow, still reminding us that we need our demons, need our darkness, need our fears acknowledged and faced rather than denied. The saint and the demon, the light and the shadow, Saint Nicholas and Krampus. Both necessary, both valuable, both part of the full human experience of winter, of celebration, of life itself. Comment below with your thoughts. Tell me about your relationship with Krampus, with dark folklore, with the shadow side of celebrations. Tell me if you've experienced a Krampuslauf, if you celebrate Krampus in your own life, if this story has changed how you see winter. Follow this channel for more explorations of the myths and monsters that shaped human culture. The dark stories we tell ourselves and why we need them. The traditions that speak truth rather than comfortable lies. Share this if you think others need to hear it. If you know people struggling with holiday pressure, who need permission to acknowledge darkness. If you want to spread understanding that not everything has to be merry and bright, that facing shadow is healthy, that we need our demons. This is the story of Krampus, the demon who survived, the shadow who returned, the monster we still need. And as you go into this winter season, into the darkness of December, into whatever challenges and celebrations await you, remember, you're stronger than you think. You can face the fear. You can acknowledge the shadow. You can survive the winter. The demons are real, but so are you. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson Krampus teaches, that we're capable of facing darkness and surviving, that looking at scary things doesn't destroy us, that integrating shadow makes us stronger, not weaker. So face your Krampus. Whatever form he takes in your life, whatever fears or difficulties or darkness you're carrying, face it, name it, acknowledge it. You'll survive. And the light, when you find it again, will be more precious for having known the darkness. Good night, traveler. Stay warm this winter. Watch for chains in the snow. And remember, whether the demon comes or not, you're strong enough to face him. Merry Krampusnacht. And may your winter, dark as it is, lead eventually to spring.